Crucio, and welcome to Cardiff Referee Society's training video on a topic which is often overlooked but an extremely important part of referee administration. And that topic is on writing misconduct reports and taking a look at what goes on at disciplinary hearings. The presentation is given by the Society's very own legal expert, Lewis Theo Wynne Evans.
Good evening, even. Just a little bit about me before we start. I'm a Tier 2AR match official. I'm part of the South Wales Development Group, and I primarily officiate on the Cymru South and the Adran Premier. I've been refereeing since 2008, and I still can't quite believe that it's been that long since I did my referee's exam. And all in, I've refereed over 1,000 games. I'm quite anal about keeping track of all the games I do, just because I think it's something that's quite interesting. I've written over 100 misconduct reports, be that yellow cards, red cards, or white paper reports, and I've had to go to over 20 disciplinary hearings. Not a record I'm necessarily proud of, but it shows that these things do come around. What qualifies me to talk about disciplinary hearings? Well, I'm a barrister by trade. I specialise in child protection and sports disciplinary panels, and I also provide advice to the FAW on discipline to their competitions department and compliance to the competition and the international department. So as boring as it is, writing reports and attending hearings is very much my cup of tea. It's not the most interesting of topics, but it's something that is bound to have affected every one of us at some point, and if it hasn't, it will do in the future. Everyone has to write yellow card, red card, misconduct reports, and I'd be very, very surprised if a referee can go through his entire career without attending a disciplinary panel in some shape or form. Something that I was thinking about when I was thinking about this topic was when I qualified as a referee, nobody actually told me what the disciplinary process was. Nobody actually told me how it works. Nobody told me who I need to report things to, and nobody told me what happens once you've submitted your report. So things have very much changed now. Does anybody remember having to use the old triplicate paper and send them in an envelope to whoever your disciplinary secretary was?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Indeed,
So times have changed by now. They moved, I think, maybe 10 years or so ago to sending them via email, and now, of course, it's all done over Comet. I think I'm right in saying that Comet is used across all levels of registered football in Wales, and that's how you put your red cards and your yellow card reports in. That's all very straightforward. That's very easy. But it's always interesting to know what happens after you send your report in, because as referees, we very rarely get to see that side of things, but I think it's quite important that we do know. So, for example, I've got it on the screen there. When you put your red and your yellow card report in on Comet, that's your job done, essentially. There are two options then for the club. When they get that through, they either accept it and they pay the fine and they serve the suspension. If they dispute it, then you as a referee, when it comes to red cards, will be asked by the county FA or the FAW to provide a report for what happened there. As far as I'm aware, that's not an option that's available for yellow cards. Yellow cards now, you pay the fine and that's that. You've got no right of appeal to it, but you do for a red card. After your report is sent, and we'll go over report writing shortly, the county FA then makes a decision in terms of whether a charge is made and whether they proceed with that action for the red card or whether they simply drop it. 9 times out of 10, they'll carry on, they'll believe what the referee says, and then they'll charge that player. What then happens is, again, the club or the player is given a further opportunity to either pay it, serve the suspension and accept it, or they can then request that a hearing takes place. At that hearing, and I'll go through that in a moment, a panel, usually of what would used to have been called the Prawn Sandwich Brigade from your local county FA or the FAW, would sit and they'd consider the charge and they'd make a decision. In terms then of a misconduct report, and I don't want to teach anyone to suck eggs, but just to make sure we understand the difference between a misconduct report and a red card and yellow card report, it's essentially anything that wouldn't be covered by a yellow or a red card. Again, you can report that on Comet, and that includes a report or a statement. Then again, the FAW or your county FA will decide on a charge. A decision will be made whether to charge the player or not. A charge letter is sent then to the club or the player. And again, a similar process takes place. If the club disputes it, they can ask for a further report from the referee. And again, if they still dispute it, then a hearing can be convened and a decision is made. So from my point of view, very much similar to how a court system works, really, in that once someone decides if there's going to be a charge, you have the right to take that to a hearing and have that panel make a decision. Just looking at red cards and yellow cards then, because they're the easiest of them all. At the moment, all those reports are done through Comet, and you've got to submit them as match officials before you confirm that the game has been played and the game has been concluded. I know there's some discussion about whether the club should be putting them on Comet or whether we as referees should be putting them on Comet. I think overall, from my point of view, it doesn't make a massive difference, provided that you check at the end of the game that the correct report or the correct player has been identified. Like I say, there's no right of appeal for yellow cards. And with red cards, appeals really are limited to cases of mistaken identity. We all remember, I'm sure there was an Arsenal game probably 10 years or so ago now, and I think it was Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, and I can't remember who the right back was, but essentially the referee, I think it was Andre Mariner, clocked the wrong player and sent the wrong player off. And that really is one of the very few circumstances, Gibbs, that's it, thank you. That is one of the few circumstances where you can be successful in an appeal for a red card. It used to be the case that you would need to write a full report out for every yellow card and a full report out for every red card on your triplicate paper, and you'd send it in. By now, you don't write any reports for a yellow card, and I think you enter a reason for the red card, and there's an opportunity to write something further if you need to, but generally speaking, it's just done by the ticking of the boxes on Comet. It's when an appeal takes place that we need a report from the referee. Comet has been very useful in that it's streamlined the process a lot. It makes it a much easier process, but it does mean that the information is rarely available to the FAW or to the South Wales FA or whoever it is until a point where they ask for it. So I think, from my experience, there are now more people who are trying to appeal red cards because they don't have a full report from the referee necessarily, whereas previously they would have a full report from the referee, so there's nowhere really that they can go. Looking then at misconduct reports, they're also known as white paper reports, presumably because it used to be, again, in the days of triplicate paper, you just have a blank page and you write whatever it is you want to write down on it. Again, this is something that's not really covered on new referees courses. I took part in a new referees course the other day, and there's nothing in it above and beyond what's in the laws of the game about disciplinary procedures. And I think it's really important, particularly that young referees, but it's always good for us to remind ourselves, those of us who are a bit more experienced, that we are able to report things that aren't necessarily explicitly listed within the laws of the game. And I think it's far too often that people don't do that and we let it slide because it's not a yellow card or it's not a red card. But it is important that if something does happen, if something does take place that's not right, whether it's in the laws of the game or not, it's important that we report it. So I've just put some examples there of what is misconduct. Essentially, it's anything that's not covered by a yellow card or a red card category. It could be anything that's not happened on the field of play. It could be anything that's not covered by the laws of the game. And it could even be something that's not involved with any particular game that you're allocated to. And again, I'll come to it in a second, but a lot of officials fall foul of being charged with misconduct for things that are completely unrelated to a game that they've been appointed or been involved with. For example, I recently represented a football referee from out west who had been charged for criticising markings on a pitch within a closed WhatsApp group for match officials. It's because another referee, and I think it's horrible that people do this, but another referee had written a white paper report into that county FA reporting him for essentially slandering a football club. There's another referee recently who had a go at some officials in the Premier League in England. He was a football fan. His particular team got a particularly bad deal, I think, or a bad run of decisions from a referee. He watched it on Match of the Day, and as he was watching on Match of the Day, he was tweeting as he went along, and again, another referee reported him by way of a white paper report, and he was charged for it. So it's really important for us as officials to remember, and I've got the list at the bottom there, that we can write a white paper report in respect of players, managers, coaches, club officials, spectators, but also other people. And at the moment, it seems to be predominantly match officials can write white paper reports about other match officials, whether it's in respect of a game or not. So, what's in a good report? It's a blessing in some respect that we don't have to write reports that often these days. But it does mean that when it comes to writing reports, we don't necessarily have as much experience of doing it as we might have been when we had to write one after every game that we did on a Saturday. The crux of a good report is it needs to be clear, it needs to be concise, and it needs to be correct. I'll go through those. When we say it needs to be clear, it just needs to include the information that is important, who did it. So let's say, for example, you're having to write a red card report for violent conduct that happened in one of your games. You need to identify who did it. And you do that by you writing the name, their number, and what team they played for. You'd be surprised how many people forget to identify which team a player plays for within their report. You then want to include who was it against? Who was the person that's been assaulted? Who's the person that was the victim of that violent conduct? And then you want to say where it happened. It's really important that you include within your report how close to the incident you were, how far away from the incident you were, where on the pitch it occurred. Because if the matter goes to a hearing, again, very similar to a court hearing, that player or someone who's there to help that player, usually a manager or a club secretary, can question you on where you were, how close you were to that, how far away you were from it, did you see it properly, were you able to properly see if it was a punch, was it actually a tap rather than a punch. So it's important that you answer those questions before you even get to that point. Make sure that you give clear information, who it was against, and where it happened. That's the important thing about it. That then moves on to the second C. It needs to be concise. You only need to include what it is you actually need to include. You don't need to go describing the weather. You don't need to say that it was a lovely afternoon on a Saturday and it was a lovely game between two well-spirited teams. Or you don't need to go and include that it was a horrible weather and there were two shitbag teams against each other. It's not important. What's important is that particular incident, because what you don't want is to give the impression that you'd already pre-decided how you were going to be dealing with that game, that you'd already decided that there was going to be a red card, that it was a game that was worthy of some form of report. So only include the information that you need to include. That then moves on to the last bit, which is don't be filling in the blanks. If you don't know something, don't include it. Far, far, far too many times, people will say when they're describing a mass confrontation, for example, it was started by the number 10, it was the number 6 who then came and retaliated, it was the number 4 who ran 25 yards to get involved, and because they know there's going to be more than 3 players involved, instead of just saying they're the only players I was able to identify, they'll include other numbers because they think, well, they probably were involved. Because as referees, we can't see everything, particularly if you're in the parks on your own and you don't have assistants, you can't see everything. So it's important that you don't try and fill it in the blanks. It's important that you only include the information that you know, that you don't try and make anything up. Right. So, disciplinary hearings. Greavesy, I don't know if you've had to attend a disciplinary hearing yet, and I don't know how many court hearings you had to attend back in your day job, but it's a very, very similar process. It's usually held on a monthly basis, depending on your county FA, depending on the FAW, and it's more than likely that that disciplinary panel will be listening to more than just the one case on that day. What they tend to do is they get 2 or 3 councillors, if it's an FAW hearing, or members of the county FA, to sit as a panel. The disciplinary secretary then will clerk for that panel, and they'll hear the case. They'll read what your report as the referee is. They'll ask you to expand on your report. They might have some questions for you. Then the person who's being accused or charged with whatever it is will also be asked some questions. They will be asked to account for themselves, dependent on what it is they're told they've done. And the judge will, the panel will then make a decision. And they'll give you that decision, and they'll decide whether a charge has been proven or not. What's unfortunate is that different county FAs tend to run their disciplinary panels slightly differently. So I remember back when I started refereeing, I was 16, and I'd refereed a game where a player in the first minute of the game had bitten another player's ear off. And that was quite a scary thing for me as a 16-year-old in a senior men's game to have to deal with, but I did. And it then went to a disciplinary panel. At the same time, that panel was also dealing with a charge against a manager who was 3, if not 4 times my age, who had verbally assaulted me at that same game, me still being a 16-year-old child. And because of the way that particular county FA decided that they ran their disciplinary panels, they didn't allow anybody in to sit with me. They didn't allow anybody in to help me at that particular panel. What that means is, or what that meant was, I was left to do the questioning completely on my own without any sort of support, and it can be very scary, it can be a very daunting process. Whereas I know that South Wales FA are much, much better with their panels, in that they're more than happy for you to get someone to represent you and get someone to assist you. Thankfully, by now, the FAW have made a decision that all panels you're allowed to have someone there to support you and to ask questions on your behalf. But as referees, we have to be aware that we've got to stand by the reports that we've done, because we will be challenged on them. And we will be asked questions about them, because that's our job, to be there to report these things. Looking back at the way the panels work, any incident within a game or that involves a club at tier 1, 2 and 3 automatically goes to a FAW panel. Anything that's tier 4 and below will be dealt with by the county FA. But if a player doesn't agree with an outcome of a county FA hearing, then they have a right to appeal to a further FAW hearing. So again, similar to a court process, it can take very long. There's lots of hoops and hurdles that people can jump through. By now, FAW panel hearings are all reported on the FAW's website. So there's a section of the website that you can look at every month, and it'll publish the reports of all the charges against everybody and what the decision of the panel was. But within that panel, again, you have the right to ask questions and you have the right to make submissions at that. There are 2 ways that a match official can be involved in that panel. The first can be as a witness, whereas if it's violent conduct, for example, that you've witnessed, you've sent a player off and they're challenging it, then you can be called as a witness. You'll be asked to give some form of evidence. You'll be asked to account for yourself, and that's that. Your involvement ends. If it's an allegation, or if it's a charge of an assault against a match official, for example, then it's down to the match official to essentially prove their case. So you're there to be questioned, you're there to be challenged about it in a slightly different way. If you're there simply as a witness, then you may not be notified of the outcome of that hearing at all whatsoever. You might just turn up there, you'll provide your report, and then the FAW or the county FA will deal with it. If you're there because it's a charge that someone has assaulted you or done something against you, then you'll usually be given that decision via the post or via email. What's important to remember with disciplinary hearings is it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how experienced you are, you don't have to go in there alone. You are entitled to have someone there with you, you're entitled to have someone represent you if you want, you're entitled to have someone there sit with you and support you, because it is a disciplinary hearing. and you're not expected to have to do it alone, because, like I say, it can be a very, very daunting process. I know traditionally referee societies and RAs provide that support, and I'm sure that Amin has been and sat with many people in many a disciplinary hearing. It's something that I would definitely encourage, if you're ever having to attend, that you ask someone go with you, even if it's just for company for the hour or so that you're going to have to be there. There are other cases where things are maybe slightly more complex, or maybe you're the person who's being charged, that you can definitely, if you want to have legal representation, you can have legal representation there. I think it would have to be pretty major for you to need that. But certainly I've been and I've represented people at disciplinary hearings because they feel as if they're not going to be able to put forward their best case and their best defence if they don't have representation there. And so that takes us on to, what if you were, as a match official, charged with something? And unfortunately, I was speaking to Ian Fisher from the FAW's Disciplinary and Compliance Department the other day, and this season has seen such a drastic increase in match officials being charged with various offences, and it's not necessarily coming from incidents on the pitch. A lot of it comes from use of social media and discussions with club officials away from the pitch. And we have to be careful as referees that there is a certain standard that's expected in the way that we conduct ourselves in things that involve football. That's not to say that you're not allowed to go and watch Cardiff City on the Saturday, get drunk and shout about it on Facebook. You absolutely are. But you have to be aware that someone might be watching, and particularly if you're someone who's trying to get up in the refereeing world, there is a lot of competition sometimes, and some people will do what they can to get one up over you. It's very sad, and it's not right that that happens, but if we call a spade, it does happen. And as match officials, we have to be aware of that, and we have to protect ourselves from that. The most common charge against a match official is bringing the game into disrepute, and that covers absolutely everything and anything that isn't otherwise covered within the laws of the game. And I'll go through some examples with you. Someone was charged for having a go at the ground conditions in a particular club within a closed referees group. I've seen referees be charged because they've gone to watch a game, they've spoken to a club official about another match official in a not so positive way, and that club official has then gone and reported them. I've seen instances where, following someone being promoted or being appointed to an international list, for example, someone has gone and had a bit of a rant on Twitter. Again, they've been reported and they've been charged. There's been far too many incidents this season alone of referees abusing a player or abusing a coach and getting themselves into a situation that really, as much as we're not there to take abuse as match officials, sometimes we do have to rise above it. And it's not something that we can get ourselves involved in. Something that's a massive, massive issue, particularly more at grassroots level, is people not complying with commit requirements and people not confirming games and close dates. So when you get a game through on commit, you've got to click it, you've got to accept it, you've got to confirm it. People don't do that, and people can be charged with misconduct for that. Another one is people not properly confirming yellow cards and red cards on commit. You've got to put it in, you've got to report them. And I'm sure we've all had it at some point in time where we've maybe sent a player off and a coach has come up to us and said, "Oh, ref, it's his last game next week. He's going to be retiring after that. Can you not put the report in?" Or they've said, "Oh, well, if you put the report in, he's going to miss the final." That's the old chestnut, really. But again, as referees, we have to put them in because you can guarantee that someone's going to be watching it on commit, someone's going to see that you haven't done it, and someone will report you for it. Another one, again, not so big these days, but it used to be big, was people fiddling their expense claims. There are occasions where people have said that they've travelled from a particular place to a game, where it turns out they've definitely not travelled from that particular place. A big one is, let's say that you're doing an academy game and maybe you're doing the under-12s, then you're doing the under-16s, then you're doing the under-18s. Well, there are some people who will claim 3 sets of travel expenses. even though they've attended at the same place once and driven home once. If you do it for long enough, you will get found out. There are examples of people who have been travelling, who've been claiming expenses for travelling by car, but actually they've used a bus pass. So again, you can and you will be found out, and you can be charged for it. And again, the other thing is the big thing, putting things on social media, even within closed groups. So Amin keeps a very tight watch on what's put within the Cardiff Referee Society chat, and that is absolutely right, because there are instances in other counties and in other referee societies that I'm aware of where people have been reported and charged for bringing the game into disrepute within their own closed WhatsApp groups. So it's very easy as referees for us to just unwind and let steam off when we're in those closed groups, but we have to be mindful that there might be someone in there that thinks that something is inappropriate and they report it, and the county FA will then deal with us for it. Referees can be very easy targets for clubs and for fellow referees sometimes when it comes to misconduct, so you just got to be careful about it. In terms of the process, if as a match official you're charged, the process is very much the same as a player or a club. You'll be sent a charge letter from the FAW or the county FA. You're given an opportunity to respond, and a disciplinary hearing is held. If you as a referee are ever charged with anything, I would very, very, very strongly advise that the first person you need to contact is someone from your local referee society, and then you need to contact Jack from the FAW, who can then give you a little bit of advice on the process. The FAW don't want referees being charged, but unfortunately, it can't be one rule for one and one rule for another. It's got to apply across the board. If a disciplinary hearing is held, the majority of hearings I've attended the past couple of seasons have been to represent match officials, and I'm more than happy to do that, because I think that it would have been great if I'd have had that benefit when I was younger or more inexperienced in the world. So again, it's something that me and a group of my friends who all work within law have set up a system where, without charge, obviously, we represent referees at various disciplinary panels for various sports, just because we think that that's something that is often overlooked. And if you're going to put yourself out there in a position where you referee a game, the very least you should have is representation if you're called into question. What is the punishment if you are charged? Well, again, it's the same as a player. You can be fined, you can be suspended, and you can be deregistered. Very rare that you're essentially struck off as a referee, but it is something that has happened. We've seen referees who have been fined. We've seen referees who have been suspended. There was one referee who was suspended before COVID, before lockdown took place, for comments made on social media, and his suspension was then extended after we returned. So it's something that we have to be very, very careful about. It's something that we have to make sure that we don't fall foul of. Any questions? Anything that doesn't make sense there? I know it's a very, very boring topic, but it's something that I wish was taught to people at an earlier stage within their refereeing career. Certainly nobody ever told me, and it wasn't until I got to university and became incredibly boring and incredibly interested in this type of thing that I learned about it. But the important thing is, if you are charged with anything, if you're ever stuck with any disciplinary hearings, there's plenty of people who can help you. There's plenty of people who will have been through it before. So it's important that you do ask for that help.
Diolch, Lewis. That was really, really interesting. Question I've got about hearings. I guess it's a South Wales FA centric question. Unfortunately, I've attended too many hearings. The process has been good, and I have no issues about how it's been run by the county. But one thing that has interested me, if you go back a number of years, and I think societies would advise newbies accordingly. When you're asked by the chair, do you wish to present your report? I think the guidance would have been, I've got nothing to add to what my written submission, but I will take any questions. What I've noticed in more recent years, the panels are more insistent on a verbal introduction. I just wondered why that is, and whether that's something you're aware of, and whether that change may have caught you by surprise.
Yeah, you're right. I was definitely told when I tried to speak to someone before my first disciplinary hearing, go in, say you've got nothing to add, and hope that nobody asks you anything, and you can leave. That's definitely what I was told. I think I'm always a fan of, if there's something that you can expand on orally, that you should do, and that it makes no harm, does no harm for you to go over your report again, even if you just read it out, because I think to hear it from someone, particularly if it's an allegation or a charge of violence against a match official or assault of a match official, I think it's important. I think the change is probably because Comet no longer gives you the opportunity necessarily to go into as much detail as you might have done when you were given an old triplicate paper with essentially a big box and space. It was easier to write things, and I think as well, as referees, we probably write less reports than we used to now, because we don't need to write them as often. And if you look at the younger generation of referees as well, and this is very much a generalization looking at different generations, younger people write less. And the quality of what's included within the report, and again, a sideways comparison, when I look at court witness statements, particularly from people who are slightly younger social workers, younger police officers, they're not as detailed. They don't include as much information, and you often have to get more information from them orally just because the detail isn't there. And I think it's always good for a panel to hear from a referee, I think. And you're there, I suppose, that the gist of it, you're there for a reason. If all you're going to say is, I've got nothing to add to my report, then you can question what the point of you being there is in the first place. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Mark. There's definitely an increase in people actually saying things, and I think there's an increase in people wanting their opportunity to say what they want to say as well. Abuse against match officials in particular is on a particular high, and I know a lot of referees, or most referees that I know, aren't shy of saying what it is that they want to say, really.
And there's a question then about, say if you do, on the other hand, have concerns about something you witness at a game, whether it's about an official or the team or spectators, and so on. Do you remain anonymous in that process, or do you have to, stand up and be counted?
It's a difficult one. There are some exceptions where you can be anonymous, and that very much depends on what that particular allegation is. But by and large, you're expected to stand up and be counted, because you're entitled to be questioned about it. You can't, for example, and again, I don't like saying it because it's horrible that we're in a situation like this, but particularly where things like promotion are concerned, you'd be very, very surprised about the lengths that people would go to try and get one up over other people. And there are circumstances where people will not necessarily make purely malicious allegations, but will definitely over-egg the pudding. And so it's an important part, I think, that if you are going to allege something to somebody or about someone, that you have to be willing to stand up and stand by what you say. There are some exceptions. So, for example, if it's a very delicate nature, if it's something that's a form of discrimination, then things like that, way more understandable why you might need to stay confidential or anonymous, because it's something that's more important. Or if it's something that you've seen that might have a wider impact on someone, that's something that might have some criminal involvement for someone, then again, there are circumstances where you can ask to remain anonymous. But by and large, if you've seen it, you've got to report it, and you've got to be there to be questioned about it. In the same way, if I, as a match official, was charged with bringing the game into disrepute by way of, let's say that I've said something to a secretary at a particular club where I've been slagging off another club, and someone reports me anonymously, well, it's only right that I get to know who that person is, and I get to challenge that person on it. Yeah. See, Kev's put something in the chat in terms of where he's had an experience where he closed the Comet app at the final whistle and realised he'd forgot to put his cautions in, emailed the South Wales FA, and he added them straight away, and that's absolutely right. So there are, I can tell you from a family member who works for one of the one of the top two divisions or the top two tiers of football in Wales, that on a Saturday evening his phone and his email won't stop ringing because there are officials who have accidentally forgot to put their cautions and their red cards in. And that's fine, that happens. As long as you can identify it and as long as you can tell someone and ask them to put it in, that's absolutely fine. The issue is when there are people who deliberately don't put them in, or people who are negligent about it and say, well, there we are, I'm done, and forget to put them in. Because, yeah, okay, it might be that you've got to sit in your car and drive to somewhere where you've got signal, because a lot of the clubs we go to may not have signal or may not have Wi-Fi. But if you don't put them in, there are fair play leagues, there are fair play tables that can be up for, and there can be prizes and money up for grabs for compliance with those fair play tables. And it could well mean that if you don't put a yellow card in, that particular player is not suspended from the game and goes on to score a winner that might relegate a team a couple of weeks down the line. So it's really important that it is done. And like Kev says, if you forget to do it, it's fine. We all forget to do things, we've all done it. But it's important that you then identify and tell the correct person that it does need to be done.
Okay. So is anyone else like to add or ask a question? I was going to say, yeah, come back to your original point when you said that something like this is not covered in referee training, and it is a steep learning curve when it does happen.
Yeah.
Because there will be a time when a game goes horribly wrong, and you know, it's the kind of thing as in, okay, well, you've got to report it, okay, so you go through that process, but then it's that the hearing then when you actually sat, you know, in a room with the other party, and they're trying to question and trying to you know, get out of it every way that they can and question question your integrity and all the rest of it. So it can be quite intimidating, but you know, thankfully, like, you know, I've always found myself as FA to be really understanding, and you know, they've been through hundreds and thousands of these and you know of hearings, and they're always looking out to protect the referees. But on the referee's behalf, you've got to make sure that you've dotted your I's, crossed your T's, and all the rest of it. And yeah.
Exactly. In my just to give you a flavour of the baptism of fire that I had in my very first season as a referee, I didn't really know anything about any disciplinary panels. I had to attend 3 of them in my first year. The first one for a player biting another player's ear off. The second one, where I was on the line, was for a 200-man match brawl within a cup final. And the third one was because a player who was subsequently sent to prison went again in the first minute of the game and deliberately broke another player's leg. All things that I had never ever thought that I would have to deal with at all, let alone in my first season as a referee, and having to deal with those disciplinary hearings without, not necessarily without support, but without having the knowledge and understanding that that was something that I would one day have to deal with as a referee. So it's a shame that it's not dealt with as part of the referees training, but that's why we have referee societies, so we can share experiences and everyone can feel supported about it. Yeah,
definitely. Because like if it does go wrong, then yeah, you need to reach out and get some help, because otherwise it could be on the training day, it could be putting people off doing a course in the first place, saying what.
Well, if anybody's got anything they want to raise, or if you know, either now or if in the future that you're involved in any disciplinary proceedings, you want to talk through it, my number's there, my email's there, I'm on the WhatsApp group, so you're welcome to get in touch. No problem at all. No fee as well, which is always important to add, I think. So
Brilliant, yeah. And I'll echo what Valentine said. Yeah, thanks for giving up your time and putting that presentation together for us.
No problem.
Hope that you found this video to be useful and a handy tool for when you officiate your next game. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Diolch yn fawr and hwyl fawr.